Welcome to the Higher Ed Athletics Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Mark LaBarbera, Director of Athletics at Valparaiso University. Mark, thanks for taking the time and being on the podcast.
Yeah, nice to be with you today, Travis.
It's been a great summer of interviewing people for my doc program. Going to do all this for an independent study and practicing the qualitative research. And so getting someone like you on that's gone through a pretty substantial change with your athletic department recently. But before we get to that, can you just profile the institution of Valparaiso? Some may know it as Valpo, but Valparaiso University. Things we're looking for is the location, the type of the institution, number of students, and then the athletic conferences and number of student athletes that you all have.
Sure. So Valparaiso is the largest Lutheran university. We're also the only independent Lutheran university. We were founded in 1859. And when I say independent Lutheran University, we are not formally affiliated with any of the different groups in Lutheranism. So we're the only independent school. We're in Northwest Indiana. So we're about an hour southeast of downtown Chicago, about 2 hours north of Indianapolis. We are located in Porter County, which is the proud home of the United States' newest national park, the Indiana Dunes National Park. We have, as far as students, we have about 2,500 undergraduates and about 400 graduate students. So we're right around 3,000. And athletically, the majority of our conference, or the majority of our teams, are in the Missouri Valley Conference. We're excited that we made that change, I think, 5 years ago. So we're Missouri Valley Conference, with the exception of 3 of our programs. Our football program is in the Pioneer Football League. And our men's swimming program is part of the Mid-America Conference. And we have a women's bowling program that's a proud member of the Southland Bowling League.
That's awesome. Bowling's a growing sport in NCAA. It's something that people should keep an eye on. And, you know, a big reason want to have you on, we'll get to a lot of different things, but you all just went through a name change. You're now the Beacons, and I'd like to just kind of spend a majority of our time, maybe if you can just give us the reason, the story behind the change. And I don't think this is the first time that the university has changed somewhat of an identity. I think like 10 years ago, I saw that there was talk about changing names. I don't know if anything happened, but can you maybe just give us a backstory on the decision to change, and then we'll get to the processes?
Sure. So a little history on the school. So I said we were founded in 1859. The Lutherans actually bought the school in the late 1920s. So from the 1859 into the 20s, although we had athletic programs from the late 1800s up until that time, there really was no nickname for the athletic programs. When the Lutherans bought it, they did come up with a nickname, and our original nickname was the Uhlans, which is what's an Uhlan? An Uhlan is a German cavalryman. And then in the early 1940s, the faculty got together and said, it's really not a good idea at this point in time to have a mascot that's a German soldier. So the faculty decided in the early 1940s to change it. And they went through about a year-long process, and they came up with Crusaders. So in the early 40s, they changed it to Crusaders, and we've been the Crusaders from the early 1940s up until just this year, where we changed the nickname. So there's kind of an interesting history to it. So you're right, it's not the first time that the nickname's been changed. One of the things that happened over time is people's perception of Crusader has changed. You can see that much more so although there's positive connotations to Crusaders or to the word crusade, there's also a lot of negative connotations to Crusader and the word crusades. So I think about a year ago, and I should take a step back. There's been an ongoing conversation probably for 20 plus years on whether Crusaders was an appropriate nickname for the school or not. So it's not something that had just happened in the last 12 months. But probably about 12 months ago, maybe a little longer, I don't remember the exact timeline, the board of the Alumni Association passed a resolution asking that the university study the nickname. So that was kind of the first step. And then last year, when the school year started, first the faculty senate, and then a little short time after that, the student senate, both passed resolutions asking the university to change the nickname. So there was kind of a confluence of groups that came together saying, hey, maybe it's time that we reevaluate this. We had an interim president at the time. We were a woman, Colette Irwin-Knott, who had been a board member. She was a Valpo alum. So because of that the growing voices to do something with it, she formed a task force to look at it. And the task force had a pretty broad representation. There were alumni, there were faculty, there were current students, and they kind of had a conversation around, was it appropriate or not? And then they made some recommendations. Well, they provided information to the interim president. I think that would be the best way to put it. They did have some surveys with the Valparaiso community, so with the alumni and the current people that were here, and then they took that information and they kind of organized it, and then they presented it to the interim president. She then made the decision that it was time that we, based on what she heard from the task force, that it was time that we change the nickname. So that's kind of the whole process, the way it came up. The timing was interesting, simply because it was an interim president that dealt with it. But I think the university really felt like they needed to. As I said, there had been conversations kind of around it for a while, and it's just the way that it played out. Because of that timing, the new president, Jose Padilla, who started in March, so he then picked up the task of deciding what the new nickname would be. So that was kind of the process of how we ended up changing.
That's a great backstory, because for an interim president, at least she was an alum and board member, so she had a good knowledge of the history. I guess I wasn't. I live in central Indiana and I work in Bloomington at IU, but I never really, to be honest, I think a lot of people think of Valpo athletics as Valpo. And so I knew it was Crusaders, but I did not know that there was this like history of it a growing problem of concern.
Yeah. And Travis, I would say the point you just made is a really good one, because you can see I've got Valpo gear on, but we brand in athletics primarily with Valpo. We didn't use the nickname very often, and it wasn't because we were trying to make any statement. It's because the comment you made is what we realized and became apparent to us, is that Valpo is a strong national brand. And the university does use the athletics program to further its national branding and to further give it a platform for national messaging. So it made sense to use the strongest national brand. And so if I wear my Valpo gear and I travel, there's very few times I can go anywhere in the country where someone won't come up to me and say something particularly about basketball, about our athletics programs. They recognize the name. So it only made sense that we would brand primarily with that. And we did come up with, about 10 years ago, the shield logo that you can see on my shirt and down there on the baseball field. And I think that was a really good representation of the university. It helps with it. Well, it's a good representation. It became really popular. I think a lot of our alums think we've been using it for 50 years, that shield, and it was actually a rebrand about 10 years ago to simplify our marks and to be able to better utilize Valpo as our national brand.
Yeah, because you're starting to see some schools like Western Michigan, who I think similar color scheme to you all, that are they changed their athletic logo to look more like the institution. You're starting to see more institutions and athletic departments blending and it's for brand awareness.
Right.
And let's face it, you all are a big brand with your basketball and other sports. Was there consideration, because on Twitter, when this got announced, I made the recommendation. I was like, this is a conversation on do they even need a team mascot name? Should they just go Valpo? Was that ever considered? Because a lot of people also don't realize that Valparaiso, Indiana, that's the town you're all in too.
Right.
So it's kind of another layer. Was that ever a consideration of just not having a name? And we're seeing that now with like Washington football team and the NFL, and they might stay Washington football team. Did you all just consider staying as just Valpo?
There was conversation around that. So now we're kind of getting into the process of picking the new nickname. And I do tell people, we've been careful with our language. We are making a distinction between a nickname and a mascot. And so this is our nickname. We've yet to determine what our mascot may be, but Beacons is our new nickname. So there was a conversation in that. So there was a new committee of which I was a member to determine the new nickname. And so there was conversation around the fact, did we need a nickname? Could we just be Valpo? And for a variety of reasons, we decided it would be better to have a nickname. Particularly when you get into more regional marketing and promotions, we just felt it would be better. We would have more tools, I guess, or more clubs in our bag if we had a nickname that we could use in marketing and promotions, particularly here in our own market. So we just thought it made sense. Plus, we did want to come up with something that was representative of the broader institution. And we just thought that just Valpo, although we are going to brand with that primarily, we just felt like that it would be better to have a nickname.
Well, what's cool about that is, I was doing a little research and I saw that after you came up with Beacons, and for one, I saw a video on YouTube that you have a residential, like in a student housing already called like Beacon Hall. And then also the motto of the institution in English is "In thy light, we see light." And that made sense whenever I saw Beacons come out.
Yeah. So one of the things we did, the committee that, and I'll tell you, our process was this. There was a committee that President Padilla put together, and our charge was to come up with 3 or 4 potential nicknames and forward those to the president. And then the president made the final decision as to what the new nickname was going to be. So we went through a lot of process. I thought it was an inclusive process. We had a website. People were able to suggest nicknames. We had, I don't know how many, we might have thousands of entries on there. We had over 300 unique suggestions for nicknames. Now,
Wow.
Some of those obviously some of those weren't completely serious looking at them, but I think the vast majority of them were. The committee did develop a rubric. We did have a long conversation about what was important in our new nickname. Well, what aspects did we think were important? So we did develop a rubric, and every one of those suggestions was put through the rubric. And so we took that, we just kept funneling things down. So we took those 300 plus suggestions, and we think we narrowed that down to a couple dozen. And then we narrowed that down again to 8. And then we essentially narrowed that down to 4. We did do surveying in there. We were careful to create surveys where we asked people their thoughts, but we didn't actually want to vote on the mascots. One of the things that came up in the process of deciding to change the nickname is, at what point is there a critical mass to make a change? So I've heard a lot of people have said to us, alums have said to me, well, clearly the majority of people like the Crusaders. And you could make a case for that. The surveying we did, there were a lot of people that liked it. But there was kind of a clear demographic shift. So those people that had been at the older alums that were here in the 60s, 50s, the 60s, the 70s, they had many of them, not all of them, but many of them had one perception of what a Crusader meant. You kind of got into the 80s and 90s, and there was kind of mixed feelings. And then as you got into the 2000s, you could see kind of a shift. So it was clear that 35% maybe or more of our alums were uncomfortable with it. And at what point do you say, we need a representative of our community. It's a difficult place to have that percentage of your community say we're uncomfortable with the way we identify ourselves.
Well, you have to think long term as a
Right.
visionary too, because you're not going to want to do this again.
Right.
And
Exactly.
so that makes sense that, you know, the old timers would, well, that's not what this means. This is what Crusader means. And now it's changing over time.
Right. And the interesting conversation with people, and I've had this with a lot of alums, is you'll ask people, well, when you grew up, was that one of your goals? Was one of your goals when you were growing up to be a Crusader? Did you look for a school that had the nickname Crusader because you really wanted to be a Crusader? And of course, no one ever answers yes. That was how I made my college choice. A lot of people probably didn't even know what the nickname was when they came to school. But over 4 years, particularly with the student athletes, over 4 years of practicing and competing and doing life together for 4 years, and all those experiences, it now suddenly, you create a value to that name by your shared life experiences over 4 years. So when you leave, Crusader means something completely different than when you were in high school and you didn't even realize the mascot of the school. So, you talk to people and say, well, all those incoming students now who will be nothing other than beacons, they're going to have the same experiences. They're going to have the same shared experiences. And when 10 or 15 or 20 years from now, when you ask them about the nickname, that's going to have the same meaning to them as what the Crusader meant to you. So the nickname for many people, we realized, really represents their experience on campus and what their time on campus really meant to them. So we tell all of those people, and I tell all those people that came here that were Crusaders, you will always be Crusaders. We're not trying to take that away from you. You will always be Crusaders. That was part of your lived experience when you were here. But we now feel like we need to represent ourselves differently. But the values that we have and what our nickname represents is no different than it was 20 or 30 years ago. The experience we're trying to provide is exactly the same.
Yeah, it's when I first started thinking about interviewing people about athletic identities, I realized that it is deeper than just athletics because I've noticed from being attached, I'm an undergrad alum at IUPUI. This podcast is now moving under the IUPUI umbrella for the Sports Innovation Institute. And what was interesting is I did some research on how IUPUI changed the Jaguars. Now they changed from the Metropolitans. So I read about their process. Theirs was kind of funny because they used to get made fun of for being too close to like the bus was Metro back then.
Yeah.
And so then, of course, right after they changed, the Metro bus system changed to Indigo. So I kind of missed the Metros, but it was interesting to see what an institution does, including their students, including the faculty, and then the administration. And you also, I mean, even if you're not an athlete, if you're on campus, you're seen as that nickname, like if you're doing a student club or something like that. So there is more of an identity than I think I probably realized than just athletics with the name. That's really good advice though for a background of what you all did.
Yeah. And the other thing, the next piece for us was that I had talked about that the committee did surveying, and what we got back from our community, particularly our alumni, was that there were two I guess themes that resonated with them when we were trying to come up with a new nickname. One was doing something that would continue to honor the history and the tradition of the school. And the second one was what you referenced before. Could we tie it in with the university's motto, which once again in English is "In thy light we see light"? So could we find a way? Those seem to be the most popular or common themes in the survey. Could we find a nickname that would represent those aspects of the school? And that's where we get to Beacons, and I think Beacons does that very well. I think it does it very well. You'd mentioned that there is a Beacon Hall here. It's actually our newest dormitory. The name of the yearbook has been the Beacons for a long time. It's been the Beacon, for a long time. Although we didn't make that recommendation to the president because of the dormitory or the yearbook. But the point to that was that phrase has been a part of the campus community for a long time. And the universities use that in various ways to describe the Valpo experience of being beacons. So we just felt that, and then it obviously ties in very well with "In Thy Light We See Light." So it had a lot going for it. And I think it's a really good descriptor, once again, of the experience that we're trying to provide. And not only that, but the outcome we're trying to provide. If you were to look at the university's mission statement, it talks about growing leaders to serve in church and society. And I think, that's the whole idea of a beacon, leadership. And so I think it's good in for a whole variety of reasons.
Are you allowed or willing to tell me what the other finalists' names were?
Well, the university did say what the final 8 were. And so I don't even, and I'll see if I can remember. I don't even know if I can remember them all. So the final 8 that we surveyed was obviously beacons, I think Storm, Gold, Dune Hawks, Lightning Hawks, Lightning. I don't remember, but it was kind of those things in those kind of veins. Yeah.
Well, Dune Hawks.
I think Tempest was in there.
Well, Dune Hawks would be kind of cool because when I was a kid, that's where the Indiana Dunes is, right?
That's it. Yeah, that's what I said. So we're here in Porter County, and as I mentioned, we are the home of the newest U.S. national park, which is the Indiana Dunes National Park, which is about 20 minutes straight north from the school.
I have 3 brothers and a twin brother, 2 older brothers, and my dad. We all had 4-wheelers, and we go to the dunes. And we all had a lot of fun there growing up. My brother and my dad had a big wreck and ruined their 4-wheelers there, but we never went back to the dunes. But that's an awesome place. Regionally, that name would be great.
Yeah.
I think you could say nationally, Beacons probably makes more sense.
I think so. I think that was the case. I believe that's why one of the reasons that President Padilla picked it. There would be some regional thing, but as I mentioned earlier, we are very much a national university, and we do want to represent ourselves as a national university.
Well, my last question about this would be really, after you make the decision, obviously there's some steps that have to take place before you roll it out. We've seen with, the Cleveland Indians changing their name where they didn't even realize there was a roller derby team with the same name in the same city. So, I kind of, in grad school, I studied cyber squatting a lot with like domains and people stealing now like social media handles. For those that might go through this situation, because a lot of people that listen will eventually probably be athletic directors or their current athletic directors. I mean, what did you all have to do to keep it quiet afterwards? And then at what point is it once you get to the final one, or is it a final 4 that you start securing handles and things like that and trademarks that you need to obviously operate moving forward?
Yeah. So the last public statement we had made about potential nicknames was when we had narrowed it down to 8, and we did the surveying on that. So that was still a pretty broad field. So as the process moved along, and then once President Padilla made the choice, he did actually then bring a small group of inner group of people in and say, okay, here's what I've chosen. Now we need to start to do the groundwork. Now, the other thing I would mention is we did this on an incredibly short timeline. We really did. So we made the announcement in February that we were going to retire the Crusader as our nickname and our mascot. And then, in August, we announced what the new nickname was going to be. That's a really short timeline. I mean, people typically, you can look at the Washington football team. I mean, they've been the Washington football team for how long now? And they don't seem to be a rush. There are a couple other universities, Capital University, which is also a Lutheran institution. They were about a year out in front of us. They were also the Crusaders. They dropped it. They took well over a year of deliberation to come up with their new nickname. So we were on a pretty short time frame. But the president felt that it would be good going into the new school year that we have the nickname resolved so we could move ahead. So we had a small group, and there were things that we did. So our university council did do work as far as registering that. We did go ahead and we did register a whole variety of social media handles to try to get out in front of it. So for that very reason, and I don't know, there might have been a list of maybe 24 that we registered, a whole variety of things connected with beacons. So we did all of that before we made any kind of announcement. We did do some work on logos, and we have announced or we have made those public. Although I would say that's still really an evolving piece of it. We did feel like we wanted something when we made the announcement, but I see that as an evolving thing. I tell people I've been here, 17 years. The first 16 we were the Crusaders, and we had evolving logos for the Crusaders over that time. So as styles change, as things change, that there tends to be some movement in those anyway. So we try to take care of all those things, and then we make the announcement and hope you haven't missed anything. We did do research on there's some great sites you can find on Google where they list nicknames for colleges and high schools. And, we did go through all that and make sure we had some understanding of who else were the beacons. But then you just do it, and then once again, you hope you haven't missed something.
The process there, that was a lot of great advice. And for those that go through it again, and they'll learn a lot from that. And you also did in that gap from February till the announcement, the institution did a pretty good job of making clear that this is what the brand, this is how you're supposed to use our logo, so that you basically removed it. And so when you say we're no longer the Crusaders, you all did a great job as an institution rolling out, here's what you can use, here's the styling guide, don't use the Crusaders anymore.
Yeah. And the interesting thing, and I think this gets lost a little bit in the conversation, once again, the Valpo and the Valpo shield that I have on my shirt, and once again, you can see behind me, that continues to be our primary mark, and that will not change. So all the beacons logos will all be secondary marks. So you will continue to see this logo on ESPN and on TV. We have pushed that out to them, reminded them. I know we just saw some correspondence between us and ESPN, reminding them that this is our primary mark, that if they can use the secondary marks if they want, but this is our primary mark. We have allies in that. Obviously, the Missouri Valley Conference is a good ally because they do a lot of work with the media with us and helping us make sure that people brand us properly. And it's just a matter of getting everything organized and then continuing to get the message out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting if you all line, like whether it's a basketball tournament or something, and the catchy team matchup will be, the Valparaiso Beacons versus the Wake Forest Deacons.
There you go. I know.
Colors. Yeah. That'd be pretty cool. I would like that. But that's what I first thought of, and then I saw that I was like, Beacons just makes so much sense. So I think you guys hit a home run there. I think a lot of times when name changes come out, people are, why would you do that? And I mean, given the names that you shared, we could do a whole nother segment on like what the non-serious names were. I bet going through that list is pretty fun. Yeah. Did you have a favorite from the non-serious joking
non-serious ones? Nothing really comes to mind off the top of my head.
That'd be a fun list to go through.
There was a big push here by one of our local media, who's also an alum, that our new nickname become the Koalas, and he did actually get some push behind that. But a lot of that had to do with the fact that Ryan Brokoff, who had a tremendous career here, who did play for the Dallas Mavericks for a couple of years in the Australian national team. He was from Australia, so there was a tie in there. But he also thought that it would make a good mascot, and that goes to the whole idea that we don't actually have a mascot yet, and it'll be interesting to see. And one thing I do tell people is you won't see a Lighthouse with legs walking around our campus. It won't be anything like that. And it'll be interesting to see. There will be a whole different process for coming up with a mascot. And it could be tied directly to Beacons, or it may be tied to some other aspect of the university's tradition or history. There's some great examples. The best one I always share with people is Alabama. They are the Crimson Tide, but their mascot's an elephant. Now, I'm sure there's a historical connection somewhere in between there, but it's not an obvious one. So, and even in our own conference, Bradley, their nickname is the Braves, but their mascot's a gargoyle, which is very much tied to their campus architecture and the way their campus looks. So it'll be interesting to see how this next chapter unfolds, and what will the mascot look like, and what will that be now that we've picked the nickname.
Yeah, I mean, Indiana State is their mascot is Sycamore Sam. It's a mythical creature, but they're really the tree. Like Sycamore is a tree, obviously, but you don't see a tree, Christmas tree, just like running around. So I'm a little bummed that it doesn't sound like I'm thinking of Beauty and the Beast, the little like lantern with
yeah. I would be surprised if we saw a candle with legs running around. Yeah.
That brought me back to like 1994 when I was a 5-year-old watching that movie.
Travis, I hadn't thought of that. That's not actually come up, the Beauty and the Beast connection, but yeah, thanks for that.
Well, I was going to ask about the role of Valpo athletics in the institution's future, but I think it's pretty clear from the purpose behind this, because, you all are a smaller institution, but you're really using athletics to be able to brand nationally, while you're also sharing the name of your town and has made a name for yourselves in the state of Indiana and nationally with athletics. So I'll probably just I think people understand, unless there's anything you want to add about what you all mean to the future of the institution.
Well, I think that's primarily it. It's helping to brand nationally. It's interesting. I have here in my office, I have a copy of the 1950 athletics yearbook, they call it, which is a magazine they put out. At the time, the president of Valpo was a gentleman by the name of O.P. Kretzman, who was a Lutheran clergyman. And he has a letter in the front of that where he talks about how Valparaiso is very much a national university and aspires to be a national university, much like Notre Dame down the street. And that one of the ways to achieve that is through having a nationally competitive athletics, and particularly a nationally athletic basketball program. So the university was talking about that in the 40s and 50s and realized that that was a good way to brand the school. And so that continues. And the current administration with President Padilla understands the value of that. And that is definitely part of the future of Valpo athletics is very much to create a platform for the university to do institutional messaging. Not only messaging about athletics, but also messaging about the institution in a more global and a more broader sense. So it gives us the opportunity to do that.
And it makes sense because right now we're seeing a lot about conference realignment, and I think some people joke or scoff about the institutional mission actually does matter. But I know your conference really well from working in it, Indiana State. You could say the same thing about every school in that conference, that they're using athletics to really help grow the institution, or even keep the doors open on some of them because it's nationally known. I want to kind of shift gears towards talking about conference realignment, because you've gone through it a couple of times as the AD at Valpo. Can you maybe you can pull from examples or a story about the most recent of like why the change, and then really the strategic advice of like what factors play in? Obviously you have to be invited, but I mean, what all goes into that process, and why was it a decision for you all to make at that time?
Yeah, well, you're correct. I've been involved in 2 conference transitions. So first, from what at the time was the Mid-Continent Conference, which is now the Summit League, to the Horizon League. And then 10 years later, from the Horizon League to the Missouri Valley Conference. And each one of those conference moves were done for 2 primary reasons. The first was student athlete experience. So we want to provide the best experience for our student athletes that we can with the resources that we have on campus. So at the time when we were in the Mid-Continent Conference, that conference was geographically very spread out. So there was Southern Utah, there was Centenary, which was in Louisiana, there's Oral Roberts in Oklahoma. So the travel was really tough. We did have a good, fairly local, if you want to say rival with Western Illinois. and we had a pretty good rivalry with Oakland. But the conference was tough and the travel was tough. And the opportunity to be in the Horizon League, which we had a much more compact geographic footprint, really then made the experience for our student athletes made it better, because it reduced the travel, reduced the time away from campus, gave them more opportunity. The more time you're on campus, you can do two things. You can spend more time on your academics, and you can actually practice more to become better at whatever sport you're in. So that was good. But then also the national profile. So at the time when we joined the Horizon League, it was a really strong basketball conference. It had Butler. People forget I think the second year we were in, Cleveland State, Milwaukee was just coming off a Sweet 16 appearance right after we joined. Cleveland State had a really good program. I think the second year we were in, Cleveland State actually upset Butler in Hinkle to win the to win the Horizon League championship. And so the Horizon League sent two teams, Cleveland State, which actually upset Wake Forest in their first game, and Butler as an at-large team. So the basketball was really strong. It helped us with our national branding on basketball. But then as things evolved over time, the Horizon League changed. There were some members that left. It kind of started to spread out more geographically. And then we had the opportunity to move to the Valley. A lot of that was built on, obviously, our brand recognition. And I remember at the time when we joined the Valley, Matt Nylander, who's the national writer for CBS on college basketball, one of his comments in his article about us joining was, there are very few schools with a national brand, but Valpo is one. And this makes a lot of sense for the Valley. But the Valley, the basketball in the Valley and the national platform, because of basketball, was something that was really attractive to us to help us with our national branding for the school. Plus, it put us in a conference with schools that were probably more, or had a lot more similarities to us, particularly since the fact that there were going to be four other privates, of which we considered to be peer schools. So it just put us in a league with peer schools. It put us in a league with a high national brand recognition, and not only from basketball, but also from baseball and volleyball, which are also really good in the Valley. And it kept that compact geographic footprint that I think really helps with our student athlete experience and being able to provide the best we can for them.
Do you, as being a veteran in the role, do you see, we're talking about major changes to conferences at the autonomy level, but do you think there's going to be other conferences in Division I look to shake things up too, other than, some might take some Big 12 if the Big 12 doesn't survive? Do you think that people will be looking to make other changes for any reason maybe we're not talking about, thinking about institutions in conferences similar to the Valley? Could that happen?
Well, I've learned over particularly the last 5 or 6 years not to say anything can't happen. But when you look at the conference realignment at the highest levels, most of that seems to be driven by football. And so you're seeing changes there, and that's always going to trickle down to that next group of 5, simply because what happens as you start rearranging those schools. Be interesting to see what happens to the 8 schools left in the Big 12. Do they somehow all merge with the Pac-12? You hear a lot of different things. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. Because football drives so much, once you get below those top 10 conferences, I don't know if it'll be interesting to see if a lot happens there. I think it's really hard to tell. And I think anybody that says they know is just guessing, and they don't really. One thing that's interesting, and it's happening today as we're doing this podcast, I think it's significant that the Pac-12, that the Big Ten and the ACC are coming out with an alliance, but it's interesting to hear at least the messaging that's coming out before they make the formal announcement. So they're messaging that academic profile does matter, that graduation of student athletes does matter, that broad-based programs do matter, that the collegiate model is valuable and they feel it's important. That's been some of the messaging you've heard as they've kind of moved toward this alliance. Those are all good things in my mind. This whole idea that are we really just going to become minor leagues for professional, or are we going to try to continue to keep tethered to education? So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out and what effect that has on conference realignment.
Yeah, the Big Ten Academic Alliance was originally created by the then IU president, Herman B. Wells, and I read his biographies from a very small Indiana town right next to where I grew up, and so I've always paid attention to that. But people do take it seriously, and even at at other conferences, the institutional fit is going to be a big deal. You talked about football driving the decisions with a lot of this, and I think everyone agrees with that. You all are in the Pioneer Football League, and I'm guessing so Butler's in there as well, for people that might be wondering who's in that league, that they would know. Butler obviously branded themselves as a basketball school. Valpo is known a lot for basketball success. Pioneer Football League is also headquartered at the same offices as the Missouri Valley. Was there any consideration to try and join the Missouri Valley Football Conference, or just stay Pioneer? And then obviously Missouri Valley football is a very kind of dominant FCS conference. So that's my first question about that.
Yeah, sure. There was no conversation on our part about moving to the Missouri Valley Football Conference. The Pioneer Football League is a great football league. You mentioned Butler, but we also have Drake. We also have Dayton. We have Davidson. We have Marist. It's a great, I think it's a great conference. A lot of primarily private institutions like us, although Morehead State is a longstanding member. So it's a really good conference. It's non-scholarship, which is important. So, as you look at the landscape of college athletics, the Pioneer Football League was formed because there were a lot of like-minded schools. There was actually, back in the 90s, a lot of people don't know this, but I actually called it the Dayton Rule. But back in the 90s, the NCAA passed a rule that said if you're Division I in basketball, you had to be Division I in all of your sports. And that was because at the time, Dayton was Division III in football, and the Division III schools were tired of seeing Dayton win the national championship. They said it wasn't fair. They said they really didn't meet the Division III profile. So the NCAA did pass a rule in the 90s saying that if you're Division I in basketball, you had to be Division I in all your sports. And that's what led to the founding of the Pioneer Football League. There were 6 schools, some of which were playing Division III, some of which were playing Division II, that said we value football. It's a longstanding part of our campus, and we want to retain it, but we're Division I in everything else. So let's just form our own football league. We will pass a rule that we won't award athletic scholarships like the Ivy League, and we'll play each other, and we'll be Division I. And that has grown over time, and more schools have embraced that. So we went from 6, and one of the original 6, Evansville, actually dropped football. But, now we're back up to 12. And once again, it's a great mix of schools. And I think more schools are seeing that value of it for a couple of reasons. One, many of them have longstanding football programs. So we've had it, I have a picture in my office of the 1908 football team. So we've had football for over 100 years. It's an important part of our tradition. But it's also an important part of enrollment management for schools like Valpo, particularly at this point in time where there are fewer males going to school. So it is a good way for us to help with our enrollment, particularly our male enrollment, and a diverse male enrollment, which is important because we value diversity in our campus. So there's a lot of good reasons for us to have it. And having it at the non-scholarship level makes perfect sense because it's a financial model that works really well. It really does.
That's what I was going to ask. So I had Chris Clooney from Davidson on the podcast as well. And we talked about Davidson, the benefit, because it's a very similar profile institution to you all size-wise. And, it's with this area, even though you are all branded nationally, they're still in the Midwest enrollment crisis coming to higher education before the pandemic. Now we'll see how that even makes things potentially worse. You see some of the D3s. State of Indiana has a lot of D3 schools. You see these football teams have 150, 175 players on them. And it's very much athletics in general at that level is keeping the doors open. When you think about 50% of the students or more are student athletes, I'm guessing that gives you all with a lot of flexibility to be able to maintain your football, because there's no shortage of high school students in the area or nationally that want to come play D1 football, even if it's not a full scholarship.
That's correct. And there are a lot of young men that do want to play football. And the other thing where it helps us is we're able to create unique combinations of experiences for those young men. So every year we do a survey of the majors that our student athletes are in. And people are surprised to find out that the major with the most student athletes on our campus is mechanical engineering. Second is nursing, and third is civil engineering. Now the last time we looked, we got this year we started with 120 football players on the roster. I'm sure the number will go down, but 36 of those, I believe, were engineering majors. So, we have the ability through our athletic programs and programs like football to create unique opportunities. There are quite a few young men that would like to be Division I athletes and get a quality engineering major, and there's only so many places you can do that. Football does help us create unique experiences across our student body, I think, that are valuable, and it's another good reason to have it.
Well, Mark, I want to end it with, I've asked a couple of athletic directors that have been in the industry for a long time. I mean, you've been an AD at Valparaiso for over 15 years. In a time where, coming out of COVID, several athletic directors have exited the industry with retirement and higher ed. We've seen a lot of presidential turnover, not because of decisions made, but mainly because of the changes that have occurred and probably will occur. There's no shortage of that in college athletics right now. And I'm just kind of curious, what keeps you excited every day about the job leading Valpo in a time where there's so much uncertainty, both in higher education and college athletics at institutions like yours? Yeah.
The first thing I would say is it's been a tough, I'll say 24 months, particularly here in our campus. COVID, because of COVID and actually leading up to COVID, and because of coming enrollment changes, just because of the demographics of high school students, the university here at Valpo, like many institutions across the country, we had to make some very difficult budget decisions, some very difficult decisions on academic programs and on sports programs. We did reduce our athletics department. We did discontinue 2 of our programs. So there were some very tough decisions that had to be made there, and then COVID on top of that. And then you add name, image, and likeness, which is a whole new thing in the way we manage. So it has been a tough time. There has been a lot of new and unprecedented things that have happened. But at the end of the day, I'd like to say, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to keep the main thing the main thing. And the main thing really is college athletics is the gateway for many people and the path forward for their academics. And we really try to keep education and academics as the forefront. Now, I just want to be careful when we say that. We are the athletics department, and we do want to win. And we do want, nobody joins a team to lose. So we do want to be about winning, and we do want to be serious about competing well. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we don't keep the main thing the main thing. And the main thing is a college degree. And for many of our student athletes, I'm not sure they would be in college if it wasn't for the opportunity to be in their sport. For some of them, they certainly wouldn't be able to afford to go to college. And so we need to keep that in the forefront. And I am a firm believer that education is one of the pathways to bettering yourself, bettering your family, and the ability to provide that through sports excites me, and it always has. So I think we're trying to keep that in the forefront. The other thing that's exciting here is our new president, Jose Padilla, is got a lot of really positive energy to him. He's really got a very infectious, positive energy. And I think he has a great vision for the school. And I think I know there's some things that I haven't been able to accomplish yet. And so I'd like the opportunity to maybe get those done over the next couple of years. And so that excites me. And I think the best days of the school are ahead of us. And I really feel like we've turned a corner and there's some good things to come. So I think those are the main reasons. And the last thing I want to say is I have a great team. And anytime you can work with a really good team, our head coaches as a group, but then my senior administrative group, we have a really good team. And I like all of them. They're all very good. They're all great professionals and they're nice people. So when you can do that, when you can work with a group like that and be part of that, there's a lot of excitement. I would say this, though. I do think we all have to decide at a certain time when to step aside and let those behind us have their opportunity after we've had ours. So that'll be the interesting thing. I'm sure that's factored into many people. I know I'm starting to get to the point in my career where I think about that. At what point do I say, okay, I had my turn. Now it's turn for those behind me. But right now, we've got a couple last things to accomplish. We have a great team. We have a really exciting president. And I'm a real big proponent of education. Athletics is a pathway to education. So,
Mark LaBarbera, Director of Athletics, Valparaiso University. Thanks for being on the Higher Ed Athletics podcast.
My pleasure, Travis. Thanks for having me.